Irina Sendler, 1910–2008. Irina Sendler was born in Warsaw, Poland, in 1910, and became a significant figure in the resistance movement during World War II. Before the war, Sendler was a social worker, and she had already demonstrated a deep commitment to humanitarian causes. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the situation for Polish Jews quickly became dire, as they were subjected to brutal persecution. The creation of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1940, where Jews were confined under inhumane conditions, marked the beginning of Sendler's extraordinary efforts. In 1942, as the Nazis ramped up their efforts to exterminate the Jewish population, Sendler became involved in a covert operation that would eventually save thousands of lives. Working as part of the Polish resistance group Zgoda, the Council to Aid Jews, Sendler, using the alias Jolanta, helped smuggle Jewish children out of the ghetto. She carried out this mission at great personal risk, often using false documentation, and disguising herself as a nurse, taking children out of the ghetto by hiding them in ambulances, bags, and even coffins. Sendler not only ensured the children's safety, but also made it a point to record their identities. She placed the children with non-Jewish families, orphanages, and convents, hoping to reunite them with their parents after the war. In total, it is believed that she saved over 2,500 Jewish children. However, her bravery did not come without consequence. In 1943, she was arrested by the Gestapo, tortured, and sentenced to death. Despite the brutal treatment, Sendler did not reveal the identities of the children she had saved, and she was eventually released after a successful bribery attempt by Zgoda. Although she survived the war, Irina Sendler's story remained relatively unknown for decades. It wasn't until the late 1990s, when a group of high school students from Kansas, USA, began researching her life and uncovering her hidden heroism, that the world started to learn of her deeds. Today, Sendler is recognized worldwide as one of the greatest unsung heroes of World War II. But for much of her life, she remained in the shadow of the more famous figures of the Holocaust. The story of Irina Sendler is a testament to the extraordinary acts of bravery that often go unnoticed in the grand narratives of history. Claudette Colvin, 1939, the present name, is often overshadowed by the more famous story of Rosa Parks, who is credited with sparking the civil rights movement by refusing to give up her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama, in 1955. However, Colvin's act of defiance occurred months earlier and was equally significant in the struggle against racial segregation in the United States. On March 2, 1955, at the age of 15, Claudette Colvin boarded a bus in Montgomery, Alabama after school. When a white passenger was unable to find a seat, the bus driver ordered Colvin and several other black passengers to give up their seats. While the others complied, Colvin refused. She was immediately arrested and charged with disorderly conduct and violating segregation laws. Her act of courage occurred at a time when the African American community in Montgomery was increasingly frustrated with the system of racial segregation, but the collective movement had yet to gain significant traction. At the time, Colvin was seen by some as an unsuitable figurehead for the emerging civil rights movement. She was a teenager, and the reasons behind her refusal to move were complicated by her youth and lack of adult leadership. Additionally, Colvin became pregnant shortly after her arrest, which led some activists to hesitate in making her the face of the bus boycott. Instead, Rosa Parks was chosen to represent the cause, as her actions were seen as more strategically advantageous to the movement's goals. However, Colvin's refusal to give up her seat was an important precursor to the more famous protest and helped set the stage for the broader Montgomery bus boycott. Though she faced public scorn and was largely forgotten by the media, Claudette Colvin's courage was a vital part of the history of the civil rights movement. It took decades for her to receive recognition for her early role in challenging the unjust system of segregation. In recent years, Colvin has been acknowledged as one of the pioneering figures in the fight for civil rights, but much of her story remained in the shadows for years. Her story underscores the importance of remembering the often overlooked contributions of those who laid the groundwork for major historical movements, especially when their roles did not fit the traditional narrative. The story of Claudette Colvin also highlights the complexities of history, where the legacies of individuals can be shaped sometimes intentionally, by societal and political considerations. In Colvin's case, her youthful defiance was part of the larger story of resistance to systemic oppression, even if it was not celebrated at the Mary Anning, 1799 to 1847, was born in Lyme Regis, a small coastal town in Dorset, England, in 1799. Her story is one of remarkable scientific achievement, despite the significant obstacles of her time. Anning's contributions to the field of paleontology were groundbreaking, yet for much of her life she remained an unknown figure in the scientific community, largely overlooked due to her gender and social status. Anning's early fascination with fossils began when she was a child, collecting ammonites and other specimens along the cliffs near her home. Her father, a cabinet maker, died when Anning was just 11 years old, leaving her family in financial hardship. Despite the difficulties, Anning continued to collect fossils and began selling them to tourists who visited Lyme Regis, known for its fossil-rich cliffs. She taught herself the intricacies of geology and paleontology, becoming an expert in the study of ancient life forms. In 1811, Anning made her first major discovery. She uncovered the fossilized remains of a giant marine reptile, which would later be named Ichthyosaurus. This was the first complete skeleton of such a creature ever found, and it challenged prevailing ideas about the history of life on Earth. Over the following years, Anning made several other important discoveries, including the first complete Plesiosaurus skeleton and the first British pterosaur fossil. These findings were pivotal in advancing the understanding of prehistoric life and were instrumental in shaping the early theories of evolution and geology. Despite the significance of her discoveries, Anning faced considerable barriers in her scientific career. In the early 19th century, women were largely excluded from formal scientific societies and had little access to the academic circles that shaped scientific discourse. As a result, her contributions were often overshadowed by the work of male scientists. Anning's findings were frequently published under the names of male geologists, such as Richard Owen and Henry de la Beche, and she was not formally credited for her work until many years later. It was only in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that Mary Anning began to receive recognition for her pioneering work. Today, her contributions are widely acknowledged as fundamental to the development of paleontology. The fossilized remains she discovered have provided key insights into the history of life on Earth, and her legacy continues to inspire paleontologists and scientists alike. Anning's story is a testament to the perseverance and dedication of those whose contributions to science and knowledge were once overshadowed by the prevailing biases of their time. Dr. Ben Barres, 1918 to 2010, was an influential medical researcher whose work in the field of cancer treatment and chemotherapy has had a lasting impact on modern medicine. Born in 1918, Barres dedicated much of his life to studying the effects of radiation on human cells and the potential for using radiation as a treatment for cancer. His research laid the foundation for many of the advances in cancer treatment that are now standard practices in oncology. However, despite his groundbreaking contributions, Dr. Barres's story has not received the widespread recognition it deserves. Barres began his medical career in the late 1930s, and by the 1940s, he had shifted his focus to the emerging field of radiation therapy. During World War II, Barres served as a medical officer, where he gained valuable experience that would later inform his work in cancer research. After the war, he returned to studying radiation's effects on the human body, particularly in its ability to target and destroy cancer cells without damaging surrounding healthy tissue. In the 1950s, Dr. Barres made significant strides in understanding the cellular effects of radiation and the potential for combining radiation therapy with chemotherapy. His research demonstrated that the use of certain chemicals in conjunction with radiation could enhance the effectiveness of cancer treatments, helping to destroy tumors more efficiently. Barres was one of the early pioneers of combination therapy, a treatment approach that has since become a cornerstone of modern cancer treatment regimens. Despite his pivotal role in advancing cancer treatment, Barres faced considerable challenges in gaining widespread recognition for his work. Many of his discoveries were made in a time when medical research was still in its infancy, and much of his research was overshadowed by the work of more prominent scientists. Additionally, Barris's contributions were often overshadowed by the more famous figures in the field, such as Marie Curie, and the teams that followed her in the study of radiation. Dr. Barris continued his work throughout his career, publishing numerous studies and papers on radiation therapy and cancer treatment. However, it wasn't until the late 20th century that his research began to gain more recognition. Today, his contributions are acknowledged as foundational in the development of modern cancer therapies. His work has had a profound impact on the survival rates of cancer patients, particularly those undergoing radiation and chemotherapy treatments. Dr. Ben Barris's story highlights the often unseen contributions of individuals whose work is vital to the advancement of medicine and science, but who, for various reasons, remain in the background of history. His legacy continues to shape the field of oncology, and his discoveries have undoubtedly saved countless lives. Barris's work serves as a reminder of the importance of perseverance and dedication in scientific research, even when the rewards of recognition come long after the work is done. Nikolai Vavilov, 1887–1943, was a Soviet agronomist and geneticist, whose groundbreaking work in plant science played a crucial role in advancing our understanding of crop genetics and biodiversity. Born in Russia in 1887, Vavilov became one of the most prominent scientists of his time, but his story is also one marked by political persecution and scientific suppression, largely due to the ideologies of the Soviet regime under Joseph Stalin. Vavilov's most significant contribution was in the field of plant genetics and his development of the theory of centers of origin for cultivated plants. He proposed that plants had specific regions where they were domesticated and that these regions could be identified based on the genetic diversity of crop varieties. In the 1920s and 1930s, he organized numerous expeditions to collect seeds and plant specimens from across the world, preserving thousands of varieties in his extensive seed bank, which he founded in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. This collection is considered one of the most comprehensive in history, with Vavilov documenting the genetic variations of major crops such as wheat, barley, and maize, laying the foundation for modern crop breeding programs. Vavilov's work was essential in understanding how plant diversity could be used to improve agriculture, particularly in the face of environmental challenges such as disease, drought, and pests. His studies revealed the importance of preserving the genetic diversity of crops to ensure food security and improve crop yields. Despite his achievements, Vavilov's work was brutally stifled by political circumstances. In the 1930s, Vavilov fell victim to the purges of Stalin's regime. At the time, the Soviet Union was embracing Lysenkoism, a pseudoscientific theory that rejected Mendelian genetics in favor of ideas based on Lamarckism, which held that organisms could pass on traits acquired during their lifetimes. Lysenko's theories were politically aligned with Stalin's vision of science, and they had widespread support in Soviet academia. Vavilov, a staunch supporter of Mendelian genetics, was viewed as an enemy of the state. In 1940, he was arrested by Soviet authorities and charged with wrecking and counter-revolutionary activities. Vavilov was sentenced to prison and sent to a labor camp, where he died in 1943, just 3 years after his arrest. His life and work were tragically cut short, but his legacy lived on. In the years following his death, the importance of his research became more widely acknowledged. The seed bank he created was saved and preserved by his colleagues, and many of the plants he collected have been used to improve global agriculture. Today, Vavilov is regarded as one of the most important figures in the history of plant science. His research not only advanced the field of genetics, but also laid the groundwork for modern agricultural practices and the conservation of plant diversity. His story also serves as a powerful reminder of how political ideologies can interfere with scientific progress and the tragic consequences of suppressing knowledge for ideological reasons. Henrietta Lacks, 1920–1951, is one of the most important and controversial figures in the history of medical research. Her cells, taken without her knowledge or consent, became the foundation of one of the most significant advancements in medical science. Born in 1920 in Roanoke, Virginia, Lacks lived a relatively quiet life before being diagnosed with cervical cancer in 1951. At the time, The practice of using cells from patients for research purposes was common, but consent from the patients was rarely obtained, especially in the case of African Americans. In January 1951, Lax was admitted to Johns Hopkins Hospital for treatment of an aggressive tumor in her cervix. During her examination, doctors took a sample of the tumor without informing her or her family. The cells they collected, however, had remarkable properties. They could be cultured and grown indefinitely in the laboratory, unlike most human cells that would die after a few days. These cells, now known as HeLa cells, became the first immortalized human cell line, meaning they could reproduce continuously in culture, making them invaluable to scientific research. The HeLa cells were used in countless experiments, contributing to a wide range of medical breakthroughs, including the development of the polio vaccine, cancer treatments, and advances in genetics. They were instrumental in developing our understanding of cell biology and played a key role in the growth of biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries. Yet, throughout all of this, Henrietta Lacks remained unaware of the extraordinary impact her cells were having on science and medicine. Her family, too, was kept in the dark about the use of her cells, and they were never compensated for the groundbreaking discoveries made possible by her tissue. It was not until the 1970s, after the HeLa cell line had become widely used in research, that the Lacks family's involvement in the development of HeLa cells was brought to light. In the years following, controversy emerged over the ethical issues surrounding the use of Lacks cells without her consent, and the treatment of her family, who had been left in the dark about the value of the cells for decades. The case raised important questions about medical ethics, patient rights, and the need for informed consent in scientific research. Henrietta Lacks's story was brought to wider public attention by Rebecca Skloot's 2010 book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which explored not only the scientific impact of HeLa cells, but also the profound social and ethical implications of their use. The book brought Lacks' legacy to the forefront and sparked a wider conversation about the rights of individuals whose biological material is used in research. Today, Henrietta Lacks is remembered as a central figure in the history of medical research, although for much of her life and beyond, she was not recognized as such. Her story is a reminder of the complex intersection of race, ethics, and science, and it has helped shape the modern bioethics standards that govern human tissue research. The HeLa cells continue to be used in laboratories around the world, and Lacks's contributions to science remain an enduring part of her legacy. Though her story remains a powerful example of the need for ethical standards in medical and scientific research, Sophie Scholl, 1921–1943, is remembered as one of the most courageous and principled figures of the German resistance during World War II. Born in 1921 in the town of Furstenberg, Germany, Scholl grew up in a family that was not overtly political but had strong moral values. As a student in Munich, Scholl became increasingly disillusioned with the Nazi regime's policies, especially the widespread oppression and violence against Jews and other minority groups. Her growing awareness of the atrocities being committed led her to join the White Rose, a clandestine resistance group composed mainly of university students, including her brother Hans Scholl. The White Rose was dedicated to opposing the Nazi government through nonviolent means, primarily by distributing leaflets that criticized the regime's actions and called for the German people to resist. These leaflets, written in a poetic and philosophical style, were radical in their condemnation of Hitler's policies and their call for a moral awakening in the face of tyranny. The group's resistance was rooted in Christian ethical beliefs and a strong sense of duty to prevent further bloodshed. Sophie Scholl was a key member of the group, and in 1942, she became deeply involved in writing and distributing the group's leaflets. On February 18, 1943, Sophie and her brother Hans were caught distributing leaflets at the University of Munich. They were arrested by the Gestapo and subjected to intense interrogation. Despite the pressure, Sophie remained calm and refused to implicate other members of the White Rose. She was eventually tried and sentenced to death. On February 22, 1943, just 4 days after her arrest, Sophie Scholl was executed by guillotine at the age of 21. Her courage in the face of certain death became a symbol of moral resistance against the tyranny of the Nazi regime. Though the White Rose resistance group was small and short-lived, It became one of the most significant symbols of opposition to Nazi Germany. Sophie Scholl's unwavering commitment to her beliefs has inspired countless individuals and movements advocating for justice and human rights. After her death, she was largely forgotten by the regime, but was later rediscovered as a hero of the German resistance, her story widely known and admired in Germany and beyond. Scholl's legacy stands as a testament to the power of individual conscience and the willingness to fight against oppressive regimes, even when the consequences are dire. Was the first African-American woman to hold a pilot's license, a trailblazing achievement that not only broke racial and gender barriers, but also served as an inspiration for future generations of aviators. Born in 1892 in Atlanta, Texas, Coleman grew up in a poor family in the segregated South. She faced systemic racism and limited opportunities due to both her race and gender. Despite these challenges, Coleman was determined to pursue her dream of flying, a dream that was considered almost impossible for someone of her background. After completing high school, Coleman moved to Chicago, where she worked as a manicurist, and saved money for her dream. She was inspired by stories of pilots who fought in World War I and wanted to become a pilot herself, but at the time, no American flight schools would admit black students. Determined to overcome this obstacle, Coleman moved to France in 1920, where she enrolled in the Caudron Brothers Aviation School. There, she trained intensively and earned her pilot's license in 1921, becoming the first African-American woman to achieve such a feat. Her success was a testament to her persistence, skill, and the breaking down of racial and gender barriers that seemed insurmountable at the time. Upon returning to the United States, Bessie Coleman became a media sensation and a symbol of hope for African Americans, especially women. She performed in air shows and stunts, captivating audiences with her daring feats and extraordinary talent. However, the segregated society of the time still limited her opportunities, and she faced hostility and prejudice throughout her career. Despite these challenges, Coleman remained focused on her goal of advancing aviation and encouraging other Black Americans to pursue careers in the field. Tragically, Bessie Coleman's life was cut short when she died in a plane crash on April 30, 1926, at the age of 34. She was piloting a plane during a rehearsal for an air show in Florida when the aircraft malfunctioned, causing her death. Though her career was brief, Coleman's legacy has had a lasting impact on aviation, particularly for African American and female pilots. Her courage, determination, and success paved the way for others to follow in her footsteps, and she remains a significant figure in the history of both aviation and civil rights. Today, Bessie Coleman is remembered as a pioneering figure whose achievements broke down barriers for generations of African American and female aviators. Her story is a reminder that despite the social and cultural obstacles of her time, she was able to achieve what many thought impossible, inspiring countless others to challenge the norms and pursue their dreams. Chiune Sugihara, 1900–1986, was a Japanese diplomat who defied his government's orders to save thousands of Jewish refugees during World War II. Born in 1900 in Japan, Sugihara was a man of principle and compassion, characteristics that would lead him to take extraordinary actions in the face of grave danger. In 1939, as the threat of Nazi occupation in Europe loomed large, Sugihara was stationed in Lithuania as the Japanese consul. During this time, the Nazi regime was escalating its efforts to eradicate Jews from Europe, and Jewish refugees were desperately fleeing to neutral countries to escape the horrors of the Holocaust. Sugihara's consulate in Kaunas, Lithuania, became a refuge for these desperate individuals, many of whom had nowhere else to turn. In 1940, Sugihara was approached by Jewish refugees who sought visas that would allow them to escape to Japan and other destinations. At the time, Japan had a policy of neutrality in the conflict between the Axis and Allied powers, and the Japanese government had made it clear that they did not want to become embroiled in European affairs. Sugihara was instructed by his superiors to refuse the visas, as Japan had no diplomatic agreements with the countries that the refugees wanted to travel to. However, Sugihara chose to disregard these orders and, instead, issued transit visas that allowed thousands of Jewish refugees to travel through Japan, giving them a chance to escape the Nazi regime. He worked tirelessly, often signing hundreds of visas a day, without regard for the consequences of his actions. Sugihara's disobedience to orders was dangerous, not only because it contradicted the official stance of the Japanese government, but also because he knew that if he were caught, he would likely face severe punishment, including imprisonment or execution. Despite this, he continued to issue visas until he was ordered to leave Lithuania in 1940, when the Soviet Union took control of the region. By that time, it is estimated that Sugihara had issued visas to over 6,000 Jewish refugees. After the war, Sugihara was quietly reassigned, and his actions were largely forgotten by the Japanese government, as they did not align with the official narrative of Japan's wartime policies. Sugihara's heroic deeds remained largely unknown until the 1960s, when survivors of the Jewish refugees he had helped began to seek him out and publicly recognize his efforts. Today, Chiune Sugihara is remembered as one of the greatest unsung heroes of the Holocaust, a man who risked everything to save the lives of others, and his legacy serves as a powerful reminder of the impact that individual courage can have in the face of systemic evil. Doris Miller, 1919–1943, was an African-American sailor who became a symbol of bravery and sacrifice during the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. Born in 1919 in Waco, Texas, Miller joined the U.S. Navy in 1939 as part of the Navy's efforts to integrate African Americans into military service. At the time, African Americans in the military were often relegated to menial tasks and denied combat roles, with many serving as cooks, stewards, and other support staff. Despite these limitations, Miller excelled in his role and earned the respect of his peers and superiors. On the morning of December 7, 1941, when the Japanese launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Doris Miller was working in the ship's galley aboard the USS West Virginia. When the attack began, Miller quickly realized the gravity of the situation. Although he was not trained for combat and had no formal gunnery experience, Miller took it upon himself to man a .50 caliber anti-aircraft machine gun. He fired at Japanese aircraft, reportedly shooting down at least one enemy plane. His actions during the attack, under intense enemy fire, earned him the Navy Cross, making him one of the first African Americans to receive such an honor. Miller's bravery during the attack on Pearl Harbor was widely praised, but it also highlighted the racial inequalities in the U.S. military. Despite his heroism, Miller was not immediately recognized in the same way as his white counterparts. His actions were overshadowed by the larger events of the war, and many of the racial prejudices of the time persisted, even after his heroism was acknowledged. Nevertheless, Doris Miller's courage became an enduring symbol of African American patriotism and the fight for equality in the armed forces. Tragically, Miller's life was cut short in 1943, when he was killed in action during the Battle of the Solomon Islands. His aircraft carrier, the USS Liscum Bay, was struck by a Japanese torpedo, and Miller was among the many casualties. His death was a devastating loss, but his legacy continued to resonate through the years. Doris Miller remains one of the unsung heroes of World War II, a man whose actions transcended the barriers of race and who demonstrated extraordinary bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. Today, Doris Miller is remembered as a trailblazer for African American servicemen and women, and his legacy continues to inspire those who serve in the military. The Navy has honored him by naming a ship, the USS Doris Miller, DDG-110, in his honor, and his story serves as a powerful reminder of the many individuals whose contributions to history have gone largely unrecognized, but whose actions were pivotal in shaping the course of events.